We've got a whole bunch of people on the call from across the map. It's great to see. And thank you, everyone, for joining and choosing to spend your time with us today. Um, just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Tom, if you want to move it over to the next slide for me. Now, first of all attendees are automatically muted. So if there's any background noise like traffic, children, or dogs, don't worry, we're not going to be able to hear them. Audio is available by computer and phone. So if your internet connection drops off, call back in on the number that you see on the email that was sent to you earlier. You can use the Q&A function to ask questions. This will help us sort out the questions and make sure that we answer all of them if there's anything we need to circle back on. And it'll leave the chat open for any commentary that we want to have. And so lastly, we will be sending you guys a recording of the call. So stay tuned for that. And before we get started, just a little bit about Amelia. So we are a parks and recreation management platform. And basically, we try to streamline your jobs, your operations, and your administrative tasks to make your lives easier, while at the same time making it easier for your residents to find and subscribe to your programs and activities. But we're not here to talk about that today. We're here to talk about leadership and how you can use that in your agencies. And we have a lot of content like this available. So if you're interested in this, please go to amelia.com/library, and you'll see a ton of resources that are tailored specifically to you. So with that, Chris, I'll pass it over to you, and I'll rejoin you at the end of the call. Thanks so much.
Thank you, John. And it's always a privilege to be a part of this Amelia series and got to know a lot of folks. And I do need to do one more shout out to Kristen Zimmerman. She was my intern in Colorado back 20 plus years ago. We'll just put it at that. But my name again is Chris News. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the Woodlands Township down in Texas. I've been in the Parks and Recreation profession for going on well over 30 years now. I hate to say that, but it is a passion and it is my purpose. And also bringing people along like Tom. And Tom and I have struck up a friendship over the last 10, 12 years, maybe even 15 years now. We are doing a lot of training together. And I'm just a privilege to just really introduce Tom. Tom, give just a 30 seconds about what you've been up to, what you've done. You've done some of these for us, me, and you've been doing a lot of training yourself the last few months.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be with everybody today. I really appreciate you all joining us. And thanks to Chris and Amelia as well, the Director of Parks and Recreation for Hilton Parma, New York. And yeah, just like Chris said, just been really had the privilege to be in a few different areas, given some trainings like this and working with a lot of the individuals probably on the call, most recently in Massachusetts, Mountain Rec, Colorado, at the Pennsylvania State Recreation Park Society, and a few others. So I've done a couple of these here on Amelia with you all, and looking forward today to talking about balancing respect and leadership in a multi-generational workplace. So as we get started, you see how we kind of got it broken up here. We're going to do a little bit of an overview of what we're looking at today, talk a little bit about those generations in the workplace, try to understand them from a contextual lens, and then transition that into how we can work on our leadership skills, knowing what we have as part of our teams. But first, I'm going to ask you to engage with us. If you can please take out your cell phones and scan this QR code. I'd like to learn a little bit about all of you and your experience with whatever topic it may be. In this case, first question I'd like to ask you is, what is your comfort level with managing or working across multiple generations? So you see this fun photo of these individuals on the roller coaster. You got some people who are having a lot of fun, it looks like, and maybe some that are not so much, a little scared, a little trepid about being on the roller coaster, going down the hill. And I'm sure there's a few of individuals out there that feel the same way at work every day, working through some of the situations that we do and working with individuals of all the generations out there. So as those results come in, you should be able to view the results as well, but I'll kind of verbalize. It looks like we've got about 80 votes in already. So about half of those individuals who are with us, closing in on 100. And at this point, usually the percentages don't skew too much. So out of our options, we got about 20% of you are very comfortable working across multiple generations. About half of you do well with it. And then 30%, you're working on it, but you sometimes can feel a little awkward at times, depending on the situation. A very, very small percentage also feels the terror that some of these young individuals on the roller coaster. So that's good. Not many of you are feeling that at this point, and a lot of you are fairly comfortable or just looking to tweak and work towards really honing in on those skills.
Well, I think there's also another point too is are you the younger generation working with the older generation or vice versa, the older
Yeah.
generation working with the younger generation? We have to know some really concepts about each generation, what pushes and pulls them to really make everything work together.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. And we're going to talk a lot about that today. We're going to transition to one more question. I'm going to ask you to keep that open. We have two more of those throughout the entire presentation, but one coming up right now. I'm going to transition to the next question, which should be open. If you didn't close it, great. If you did, go ahead and reopen that. And we're looking for some open-ended response here and really asking you the question of what are your biggest challenges, or do you feel the biggest challenges working with or leading those in other generations?
And I just also put that in the chat if people don't have the ability
Yeah,
to do something with the Slido on their phone as well. So over here, Jessica also kind of made the same point of middle generation working with both older and younger at the same time. It's that classic sandwich generation that leadership oftentimes is in.
absolutely. I've got a bunch of responses here. I'll kind of verbalize some of them or the common themes, and I've seen a few come in that have to do with technology. Absolutely. There is a wide, vast range of technology that individuals are either comfortable with or what we either maybe don't know or can learn from others. The communication piece, how are we communication with all these individuals? Their styles are different. I'm a younger individual working with older generations, vice versa, older generation working with younger generations. Motivation is a theme that I'm seeing here, Chris, which is great because it's something we're going to talk a little bit about today as well.
And I want to kind of go on that too, is because Carrie said, seems to be seems to be a generational increase in apathy with generational Z and Alpha. And good job, Carrie, because we had in our pre-show lots of talk about Generation Alpha and where they're going to be. But that generational apathy, I want to talk about that a little bit later, Tom. Not right now, because I know you got some stuff to do. But I have a whole theory on that generational apathy.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple more that came in. We're working through work ethic. What is when you're looking at the younger population, what drives them? So we talked about the motivation again. So a lot of common themes here, and we hope to cover most of those that you have mentioned and shared with us just a moment ago.
Absolutely.
So today we're just looking to again just get into those objectives, really look at leadership and management from a really real high level, just what's that look like, and then dive really deep into the generational piece of it, right? What are those differences in the workplace? How are we leading those individuals? How are we gaining trust, balancing that respect? And hopefully we can send you home with some strategies that you will be able to use when you work with your teams. So just again, we're going to go through some background information here, not focus too much on the broader sense. We want to get a little deeper into the generational piece, but management, right? So from there's a whole bunch of different definitions out there, right? But I like this one here, and we're looking at the coordination to achieve goals, right? So what are you trying to do as an organization? What is your strategy? And as a leader or a manager, how are we coordinating those efforts? And then just some of those functions that have been outlined by the by Indeed, which I'd use for kind of that model. One that we're going to focus on a lot today is number 3 here, motivating a team, right? And all of these apply to everybody, but motivating individuals can be vastly different when we're working through different generations. And then shifting over to leadership, right? Management and leadership are a little different, two different concepts. And as a leader, we're looking to guide the individuals and our team to, again, achieve those goals that we talked about a moment ago, right? And common themes again, where are we going and what is the motivation? So a bunch of different qualities for effective leaders. We're not going to go through a lot of these today. We will touch on them. Of course, some of the themes that we talked about earlier, communication, right? That's a big piece when you're looking at the generations. Um, Again, looking at that, I think someone mentioned the passion or work ethic. But ultimately, what we're really trying to do is gain everybody's trust, be transparent, be aware of what's going on around us. And that last bullet point there is having the ability to work with everyone, regardless of where you are in your career and where they are.
I love the fact that you highlighted that ability to work with all, because that's what we're trying to be forced to do. You're going to get this into the next couple sessions when we talk about the generations. And we still have, Generation X and baby boomers in our workforce right now. How do you work with those folks at the same time? How do you work with the alphas and the Zs that are coming in right now? We've got to figure this out because our services are important to our communities. And if we don't figure it out, then we're actually not ensuring that our services are very, very vital to the success of our communities. We had some of the other comments on the chat. Just want to give you here that we can kind of touch on, Tom, here. Is quote unquote, Denise said, I joke the behavior of some younger employees as a result of giving participation medals to everyone, so the expectations praise for job. Don't disagree with that. And by the way, the participation medals, we gave those participation medals. So we are at the root cause of that issue there. Carrie agrees, as well as Jessica, from that standpoint. The participation medals, the parents that are act as a bulldozer, not necessarily a quote unquote, you've heard the helicopter standpoint parent. It's a bulldozer parent right now. I've heard even sometimes that somewhere where 19% of people go for their first professional job with their parent at the interview. So different workforce. The key here is we've got to adapt a little bit to their needs, but we also need to understand, which Tom's definitions of management and leadership, where we have goals to achieve, we have service levels to provide to our communities.
Yeah, Chris, funny you said that. I just had someone the other day for a summer camp position that the individual applying went out for the interview, and then all of the follow-up and calls came from the parent. It was a unique situation to work through,
Well,
but I'm sure some of you
let's
can
go
relate.
down that rabbit hole for a
Sure.
second. What did you do to that parent? Did you say, "Hey, listen, I'm hiring your kid versus you"? How did you handle that? Because I think that's a really
Yeah.
good tidbit for the folks. The 100,
Yeah.
73 folks that are online right now.
Yeah, so it was an interesting situation, and it was after all of the offers were made, and we had probably one of the higher numbers of applicants that have come in since the pre-COVID numbers, and this individual did not make the cut, so to speak. So there was a little more of a complexity there. The parent was advocating for the individual, and we explained the situation is that this is there's so much we can do with references, there's so much we can do with applications, and of course the interview process. And so ultimately we had explained that there's going to be individuals who potentially turn down positions, and then we will work down the list. It's no slight against your child, but if there is a chance or an opportunity for us to offer that individual position, which we actually did, there were 3 individuals who were offered who did not take the position, so we're moving down the list. And the conversation followed with listening and hearing. That's a big part of it, right? Actively listening to what the parent had to say, because we do want them even to feel valued. But at the end of the day, saying, hey, if this opportunity does if it is presented to your child, we want you to be understanding that this is a professional opportunity, and that from this point on, everything falls on that individual, your child, from the accountability that they take and sign off on at orientation to whatever it is that they encounter or endure throughout the program. They're going to be held accountable, and they're going to be treated as the employee.
And I want to go a little bit further into this. And Carrie and Susan are in this. There was another comment from Arizona State Parks that I wanted to, perhaps employer behavior has also contributed to employee disengagement over the generations. I think there potentially is some truth to that. The comment here, and I want to get to this because I think it goes into the semblance of this generation is so bad. Okay. This generation has got the bulldozer parents. Listen, In between 1999 and 2022, excuse me, 2002, I actually taught college at a university. It was a small university, and I can't tell you how many parents I was dealing with 20 plus years ago. So now we're in probably older millennial, and very, very young Generation X, yeah, young Generation Xers. We still have this issue. Okay, so how do we move forward? How do we find that semblance, that middle ground here to make everything work?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're gonna have to work through the parents too, because they obviously at one point or another fall within these generational brackets and have their own qualities or morals that they've been brought up on. So as we move through here, we're gonna ask if you can
Probably
relate to any of
use more
this.
paper because it's straight facts. I think I would love to earn enough money to be able to move to a bigger place with a yard with enough room for my golden doodle. My current landlord is not the biggest fan. He never came to my baseball games either.
I mean, hey, anything to move the needle, right? Triple bottom lines. Keep bringing my same homemade bologna and cheese sandwich. Use technology as little as possible. Talk to those kids in tie dyes and bucket hats as little as possible.
That's great. And if you had to assess it, what do you think your greatest strengths are? Why don't I just show you, right? Right? It's you. I'm quick on my feet. Call this one the witty gritty. Okay. I do anything for you? My biggest strengths? What do you think my biggest strengths are? I love getting told that I'm good at stuff.
Well, let's open this kimono, right? I'm a ESTJ, Enneagram 4, wing 6, which they said it's not possible. It is, it's rare. Strengths Finders individualization. Woo! I'm an otter when thriving and a golden retriever when struggling. Okay? But don't tell my wife that. I mean, honestly, I know I talked about it already, but that bologna and cheese sandwich.
Thank you for that. And
That's a great, it's a
Hey,
really
Tom, we
fun
may need to
video.
send that video out to folks as well. I'm getting a lot of chat there.
Yeah, it's great. I'll share it. It's about a 6 minute video. I'd love to show you it all because it is hilarious. Obviously, a lot of that is extreme exaggeration. But some of it, sure, we could relate. I don't know how many people know what the nitty gritty is, right? But I know that there's some kind of dance or gritty that they do on the when they score touchdowns in the NFL right now, right? So like it's very interesting to see where some of these individuals are somewhat typecast based on their generations, right? We're going to talk a little bit about that. Even the show Parks and Recreation here, right? If you're a fan like I was, you notice that there's a whole bunch of different generations in there and a whole different set of values and qualities that each one of those individuals, mindsets, knowledge base that they bring to the table and bring to work every day. And the joke of that all in that show is that most individuals who aren't in that generation bracket, they don't understand where that person is coming from, right? And that's what we're looking to do is try to understand.
Yeah, and that's actually the exact comment that Garrett made as well. Is we need to understand the world they are facing, and a lot of the older generations struggle to do that. And so, Tom and I have been talking about this topic for, basically a couple of years, and we've done different versions of this in different places and written some articles on this matter. This started actually with a session, and I gave it to my daughter, who at the time was 2022. So just Generation Z that coming out first level of the Generation Z's coming out into the workforce. And what she said is, Dad, exactly what Garrett said. We need to understand where we're coming from, how are we working, that type of stuff. And I always reflect to about 20 years ago, maybe even 30 years ago now, when I was first coming out, the baby boomers yelled and screamed about Generation X, and Generation X I mean, trust me, I made fun of you, Tom, so much when I first met you as the classical millennial, he doesn't do this, he doesn't do this like us. And so it's like a generational kind of quote unquote put down. We never want to put down people, but we've got to figure out how to work together.
Yeah, absolutely. So individuals were working in the workplace, and you could see by example, these are just some scenarios of the differences that we might find with those people on our team. And today, highlighted in green, as you can see, we're talking about those generational differences. And so there's a nice little graphic from Purdue Global. I don't know if it's going to, we're not going to go into all of this, so don't worry about it if you can't see every little word or letter. And this doesn't go into Gen Alpha, which we are going to talk about today, but this graphic does not necessarily highlight those individuals. But what's really important to see here, and there's been studies that just like this here, that as I mentioned earlier, we're somewhat defined by our generation. We're defined by what happened, what culturally happened, what we're experiencing, technology, and then of course how our upbringing leads to some of our work habits. In our case, we're talking about work habits, right? Which is important to know, though, as we move forward through this. We'll talk a little bit more specifically about all the generations in a moment, just to get that context out there. Chris, you and I talked about this, and it's going to be a common theme today. Although that there are some common themes with individuals, there is a lot of crossover. There are going to be Gen Xers who have Gen Z, associated qualities, millennials who might associate with Gen X. It is not a one size fit all. So, we do want to be mindful in understanding of the fact that we cannot just use a graphic like this and say, hey, this is what that individual is going to be like in the workplace.
Yeah, and a lot of things what we're talking about is, especially when you look at study a little bit more on the millennials, is there's probably 5 or 6, maybe even 7 different subgroups of the millennials. And so this is a broad brush just to get us started of understanding where they are. And Tom, you got some more specifics.
Yeah, so here we're just going to talk about a couple of those, give you a little bit of a context of what we're looking at. And Chris did mention some definitions of the millennials are defined a little differently. It's the millennials name, and I fall within that bracket. By year definition is always the most enjoyable for whatever reason. It's the most fun to say, and I think a lot of people. I love that individual who was talking about his golden doodle. Right, we've got a lot of interesting associations. The first generation to think of their pets as more of their family than maybe having children, right? So things like that, right? But in the workplace, you're looking at these baby boomers who now have the most experience, clearly, right? Based on their age. Face-to-face communication, the Gen Xers who are a little bit more independent, but they do value that work-life balance. The millennials, again, getting into that more tech savvy, right? Because this is now when we started to introduce things like the computer and the internet. And purpose, right? Purpose, which is so funny because back to that video again, I like being told what I do well, right? Going into those Gen Zs, we're looking at individuals who now have taken the technology to the next level. In fact, that they were born in that, right? They don't know any different at this point. The digital wave that they see or grew up with is the norm to them. The inclusivity piece. And then as we move forward to the Gen Alphas, right? So these are the individuals who are going to be in our workforce tomorrow, right? If they're not already there, you've got the 15-year-old who is going to be your summer camp counselor, possibly depending on your state's age requirements for work, or a lifeguard or a desk attendant, whatever that may be, right? And these are individuals who are at the highest of the digital, the peak, right? They've grown up at the highest level of technology, and they know a lot more than some of us even do, right? They're basically born with a tablet in their hand.
All right, Tom, let me give you kind of a quick little rundown. I threw in the question of, are you a boomer XYZ? We got a ton, no, I would say probably about 50-60% Generation X. A lot of folks that are calling themselves like Xenials and folks, which makes complete sense. And then we've got a handful of Zs coming in here, and actually like 3 or 4 boomers. So hey, all the more power to you guys out there.
Let's talk a little bit about this really great graphic from Fortune Chris had shared with me about our Gen Alpha coming in. And this is really interesting, right? So this asked what their job aspirations are by those who took part, right? And what speaks to me, and I'm going to let Chris speak to it too, is I see 32%, 21% combined, 53% YouTuber, TikTok creator. That's hard for some of us to understand as a career, right? As that's what you want as your profession. There's on the other side, you see professional online streamer, which is similar. And then you see obviously some of the other more common teacher, musician, sports athlete. But if you did this same poll for individuals 20 years ago in their generation, you're not going to even see some of these on there. And Chris, I know a couple others spoke to you as well.
Yeah, well, in fairness, I mean, a lot of this stuff didn't exist 20 years ago. So
that's right.
Just call it a spade a spade. One of the things that I really look at this, and I see YouTuber, I see TikTok creator, I see mobile apps, I see artists, it's a very creative driven process. Is they want to be creative, but also what all those positions are independent. You don't need a structure like a participation department or organizational hierarchy to do all that stuff. And so that's what these folks are craving. One of the things that I say a lot of times in when I do sessions is we've got to treat our staff like a program. And so if I'm using this data for about Generation Alpha, I'm going to be programming how to make YouTube videos, how to do TikTok videos, how to do the whole game developer tech stuff. And that's where some of the stuff that we've seen over the last few years, especially on the e-game stuff, I'm going to be doing programs. So how do I make the work in a creative, relevant fashion to this group, especially at that 15, 16, 17-year old? And it might be, sounds weird, and you guys are going to, skewer me in the comments, which I'm fine with, is how do we ensure that they have input into the processes that we're doing? How do we get their, thoughts about what are we doing for the camp programs or the lifeguard programs? At the end of the day, you're still the boss. There's no question about that. At the end of the day, there are goals to meet, revenue goals, program participation goals, et cetera, that you're being held to as an X, Y employee or Z employee. But how do we engage these people? And more important than a word is I've got to understand each generation and how to get those folks engaged based on their needs going on. And Carrie says these are seriously the top 10 aspirations. Hey, this came from Fortune magazine. So I try to use a reliable source.
Yeah, I mean, I could see it too. And Chris, great takeaways and pullouts from this. But if we really think about it from the programming perspective and even just from the general staff makeup, if I was going to tell you that at my age that I was going to be, let me just start a TikTok channel for our organization or YouTube, I'm not going to be the best person to do that. So leveraging what these individuals can bring to the table is going to be very important going forward. And maybe it's not that, it doesn't sound that easy, but on a basic level, if you have a summer camp program or a pool program and the majority of your team are in the Gen Z or Alpha group, then how can you utilize their skills and talents and what they're doing to potentially enhance that program?
Tom, I'm going to go even to another level here. Is a few weeks ago, actually 2 or 3 months ago, I got a call and says, "Hey, Chris, we want you to do this session for our lifeguards and our summer seasonal staff." And I'm like, "Okay, that's great." And then I thought about it. I'm a 53-year-old guy, and I'm looking at this going, how am I going to really relate to 15, 16-year-olds? I need somebody who's going to give the message that I would give, okay, with a concept and thought process, but also who is a little bit more relatable, et cetera, et cetera. And so I call up Tom. I said, "Tom, I got this opportunity out in Colorado to do some training for lifeguards." He's like, "Yeah, sure." And when we were talking to Scott, who is the facility manager, deputy director of mountain recreation, he's like, "Oh, that makes complete sense." And so again, how we even deliver the message may be the same. It's how it's received by the respective who it's coming from.
Yeah, and when we get into toward the end of kind of that, put it in an application, I've got a perfect case study, an example of doing exactly that with Mountain Rec just a week ago.
Yeah.
So just kind of wrapping that up before we get into a little more context of these generations, just consider that you are now working in an era where you have over 60 years of experience in your workforce. And that could be at any one point in time for an individual, but you have to bring it together as a team. So Chris, we talked a little bit about this, and now before we talk more context, clearly with what we just showed you with the Gen Alpha, and then of course all of these different generations, there's challenges, and many of you talked about it. Now I want to talk specifically to the challenges of where you are in your career. So are you managing upward? Are you looking at a situation where I was brought on to this position about 11 years ago, and the majority of individuals were in their 40s, 50s, right? So there was an age gap of 15 to 20 years my senior. And I battled with that, right? These people may be saying or thinking that they have the experience. I'm just a kid, right? Challenge there. How do you get and gain the respect and harness all that to do what you're trying to do? Peers of a similar age, I'm dealing with that right now, right? I've got an individual on team who's just around the same age as me, and it's separating yourself, but also trying to relate and motivate that individual, right? And of course, some of you are managing downwards, and this is where we talk about maybe those Gen Zs and the Gen Alpha. And I can tell you, when I was at Mountain Rec and I was talking to some 15, 16, 17-year-olds, all I could think of was that second bullet is that they absolutely think I'm a dinosaur at this point, sadly. But hey, you got to find a way to relate. And so, realizing that we're all coming from different backgrounds and upbringings. And, Chris, I don't know if you want to share a little bit of those
And
challenges.
I've had some experience, Tom, where, when I was in Colorado, everybody was about 15 to 20 years older than me. I was director of community services. I think I got that job when I was about 27, 28 years old. And here are people that are 47, on the closer side of retirement than me. And like, what the hell does this kid know? And I had to go in there and kind of re-examine, okay, this is a different generation. These are boomers in this case. And maybe I didn't even recall this, but they have as much to learn from me as I have from them. Okay. And that gets away from the management of thou shalt do this, that I'm the director, thou shalt do this, to how do we make it a working group, and that we're learning from each other's experiences and that type of thing to really foster the communication. And Hannah said it very much right, of you have to meet the people at their location. That is a huge aspect there. I had 6 different sites that I had, and I rarely had meetings at my office. That I was going to them. I was having the small talk with them. And I would be in my car. Thankfully, it was a smaller town of 2 miles to this way, 2 miles to the rec center, 2 miles to the golf course, 2 miles to the park shop, 2 miles to this. That I was always meeting on their turf to really kind of engage from that standpoint is really, really important. And then today, when I got to our community here in Texas, we were managing all the same people at my same age, which is almost as equally as difficult.
Yeah.
While you're understanding that they're going through the trials and tribulations of life like you're going, setting yourself apart as Tom made, that I never went to the quote unquote staff parties, maybe once or twice a year, yes, but there was a group that was going out every Tuesday night or Saturday night. I was like, no, I got to be different. And that's the difference between management, leadership, and those concepts there.
Absolutely.
So Linda just put something here is, as a boomer manager, I like the term reverse mentoring, and I still have a lot to learn from my staff and I can be afraid of. And there's another thing that we're going to talk about, that I'm just going to talk about right now because Linda gave me the door here. I love this quote. Tom's used this quote. Some of our friends have used this quote. Cindy Sullivan from, where's Cindy from? I just forgot here.
New Jersey.
New Jersey, right. The quote is this, is if you don't have a mentor, if you're over 35 and you don't have a mentor that's under 30, you're going to miss the seismic shifts in our society. And it's a really interesting quote when you look at that. And Linda, thank you for bringing that up. New Jersey, but now Ohio. Thank you, Denise. We've got to, as older folks in that boomer generation, that Generation X generation, as well as some older Generation Ys, is we need to look and understand what the Z's and even alphas are going through, which will help us lead them better. It's one of the reasons why Tom and I have this friendship. It's another reason why I engage with Molly Keys from South Windsor, Colorado, Connecticut. She is one of the young NRPA 30 under 30 folks. And she has a completely different lens than Tom does or I do, but it helps me be a better manager and a leader, more importantly. Tom?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so glad that some of you are hitting on some of the things we're going to be talking about so that we can get those out there for you and share. And this next portion here is going to be more of some quick hitters just on the context piece. So what is it? What should we understand? And I love what was said a moment ago about meeting them where they are, and not only where they are, but where they came from. Right. And so thinking about it from the context, what shaped these individuals? Why are they here right now? Why do they have the thoughts or the mindsets they do? And then why does it matter? So a couple quick hitters here, because we've talked a little bit, obviously, about these different generations, but the baby boomers, right? So some of that iconic tech that we might think of as TV, right? And then the moon landing, and then these cultural events such as civil rights, right? So these are things that these individuals lived through that shaped them. Looking at the Gen Xers, we're going a little further into that technology, cassette and Atari, and some individuals probably can't relate to that very much. But
What's Atari? What's Atari, huh?
yeah, what's Atari? It was the first Nintendo, right? First video game, I believe. Well, probably not the first, but in my mind. And then, of course, you're looking at some other those cultural pieces, right? Cold War's end, and now personal computers. Going into the millennials, again, what I can relate to this is I could remember the day that internet was introduced to me as like a 10-year-old or whatever it was. I was fascinated, right? So now you've got further on into that generation, the laptop, the social media, and then of course looking at a big cultural piece of 9/11. And again, for those of you who are in my bracket, you probably remember that in a different way than most individuals do. Gen Zs, you're looking now at the technological shift of social media into things like, well, you got obviously your smartphones and things like that, but your TikTok, your YouTube. And then, of course, the individuals who grew up as youth during COVID-19, not just as maybe young individuals, people who were graduating high school and how that impacted them going through the process. And then your Gen Alpha, now we're like I said before, these are the children. My child, he's 4 and he understands how to use a tablet in some ways better than I do. I mean, not truly, but it's amazing how intuitive it is for these individuals. And of course, the AI, right? The AI movement, these individuals now they'll be growing up with this, where it's new for us. We're learning it. A lot of individuals who were not in this.
Right. And one of the things I'm jumping on Generation Alpha, what I've seen is it stops at 2024 and now we're into Generation Beta. So constantly every 10, 15 years, we're going through this generational aspect. That's really, really interesting. And Tom, Sherry and Jessica will claim that Atari was not the first. There was this thing called Pong,
Yes,
and
yes.
then the good old Commodore 64 games and Odyssey and some of the other ones that are out there. So
Absolutely. I do recall Pong, but yes. So why does all that matter? Why does it matter that we know these things? Ultimately, the awareness that you have is going to be directly tied to your success, right? So you communicate with individuals better, you can relate to them better. Knowing and buying in and being interested in this can help with the collaboration and trust piece. And I look at it from the perspective of a puzzle, right? Every puzzle that you have has unique pieces that are meant to fit together to create this wonderful picture. And that's what we're trying to do in the workplace, is fit all the puzzle pieces together, have them work cohesively, and create a high performance workplace. Looking at this from that lens of communication, again, just a little more context before we shift into some application. These are some of those communication pieces that these generations were basically brought up with. And so some of us can't relate to some of it, right? But for those of you who have lived through all of them, right, there's so much to really consider here. But how does that change how we are going to be interacting and communicating with the people on our team? You have to be considerate of that.
And Tom, I'll just be a case. The Generation X are largely the managers these days. We have to be comfortable. So it's not just that they have to, we have to manage, quote unquote, down, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
They need to be, relevant on their communication channels, and which then becomes a real big challenge of trying to manage 5 or 6 different communication systems. I mean, I realize that, I have, phone messages, I have text messages, I have DMs, I have Teams, I have Zooms, and it's really a challenge, but that's the world that we live in.
Yeah, Chris. And I think, this goes down to a very basic piece of communication and being flexible and adaptable. But realistically, how do you get the best out of your team members right from the start? And especially when you're looking at that communication piece, but just asking questions. We're going to talk about active listening a little bit later, but asking these questions when the individual gets into the office or comes in for day one on your onboarding process. What are we doing that we can work together in the best way possible for you? How do you like to communicate? How do you want to be managed, right? And not only is that good for us, for our skills and for us to adapt and be able to communicate with individuals the best way possible for not only them, but for the team, but also looking at that user-driven experience. We're creating an experience where these individuals have now helped shape what it looks like, and it's creating some accountability, and you're going to start by gaining some respect by getting the input and asking those questions.
And I'll tell you even more here, if you go back to that slide very,
Sure.
very quickly, is the fact that, how, just even before you start them onboarding, you start engaging them with the who are you? Why did you, yes, we wanted you the job, but, how are you, why are you here? Type of thing. Why do you want to be here? So important. So I've gone into a number of different organizations over my career. And the first thing I do is on the first day is I bring everybody in, and inevitably they want to talk about all the projects. And it's like, no, I want to know who they are, how they operate, what gets them up in the morning. So that helps me figure out how to communicate with them better and engage with them and have some sort of connection with them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I recently had the opportunity with one of our newest full-time hires to do a little case study. I asked the individual, hey, we talked a little bit about this when you were brought on, but I'm talking a little bit about the subject of multi-generational workplace. Do you mind if I use some of our conversation? And Ryan obliged, great sport. And here's some of the questions that were asked, right? What are you looking for in the workplace? What motivates you? And how do you like to communicate, right? So these are some of the things that I wanted to really get down on paper and see if they aligned with all of those, those stereotypes that we showed you earlier of a Gen Z. And what I found was exactly what we talked about before. There's a lot of crossover. Not every one of those traits or stereotypes fit the bill for this individual, but some of them did. The direct communication and the affirmation piece, right? So text, you see here, exact response, and I quote, in person and text is cool too, right? So, all right. So I learned a little bit about that, the individual and how they want to communicate. Chris and I talked about this before and looking at growth in new experiences and how you could learn that and what does that do for us to maybe try to use that as a motivator, right? How can we motivate someone with growth opportunity, experience opportunities? I'm not going to get too much into this because there was a lot there, but it was a real eye-opening experience. And of course, when asked if our communication techniques or something about age, the response was, "Yep, you guys are young enough." Which I guess if I'm 20 years their senior, I'll take that for now.
Well, I just want to comment on that aspect of in-person communication. There is still tremendous value in that in-person communication with the younger generations. While we think, we see stereotypes of the younger generation of, oh, just text me, just text me, just text me. I'm seeing it from a parent level with young professionals that are my children. Not that they work for me, but in other places across the country, that they desire that growth opportunity, which is only done through communication, especially in the in-person communication, as opposed to everything being digital.
Yeah. Now we shift to this next piece. We're talking a little bit about being kind of sensitive or culturally aware of the individuals that you're talking to, right? And not necessarily demeaning them based on their age and where they are if you're not in that same bracket. So I don't know if anybody's seen the movie The Intern, but a quick skip from that, which had me laughing. No, I'm all about that bass, no trouble. I'm all about that bass. Hello.
Hi, I'm Ben Whitaker. I received an email about an interview for a senior intern program.
Hey, Ben, how's it going?
It's going good, real good, thank you.
Excellent. Take a seat around the corner and someone from talent acquisition will come get you.
Thank you. Talent acquisition.
There's going to be a
couple of interviews today, Ben. We want to make sure that we both find the right fit. Business as usual is not really our motto, so we hope you have some fun here. This is the first time we're hiring senior interns, so some of our intern questions may not exactly fit your profile, but we're going to go for it anyway, okay?
Fire away.
Okay, good. Where'd you go to school?
I went to Northwestern.
Hey, my brother went to Northwestern.
Probably not at the same time.
Probably not. He graduated in 2009.
Class of 65.
Wow. What was your major? Do you remember?
So she did pretty good up until the point where she asked if he remembered his major. And it goes on. That's another one that I could share. It goes on to show some more clips from that. And the next individual asked Robert De Niro's character, what's your, this is a question I love. What's your 10-year plan? And his answer was, well, my 10-year plan, I'm 72. So again, being cognizant of individuals wherever they are in their points. And this is just a little graphic. We're not going to get too much into it, but the feedback, even the way you talk to individuals, can be varying and different, and should be varying and different, right? We said one size does not fit all. So again, looking at different ways that individuals want to be talked to, and that may not be the same across the board, but again, using some of those statistics that we showed and asking questions to find out how individuals like to be communicated with. Real quick, if you can indulge us before we head into our final 10 minutes, we're gonna take just a minute on this. Real quick, I don't want you to, it's on the Slido app, okay? And it's up in live. You can put it in the chat too. And I don't want you to write necessarily a paragraph, but just what are some differences of how you might onboard a 15-year-old, maybe a camp aide versus a 62-year-old seasonal supervisor? What might differ? So a couple people wrote in here, communication style, asking questions, two separate onboardings with a tongues out winky face. Yep, that would be helpful. Meeting them where they are, being flexible, explanation of the items that you're going through. This one went a little more specific. A 15-year-old gets more hand-holding with documentation, rules, policies to make sure they actually understand, whereas a 62-year-old probably understands all of that, but may need more assistance figuring out registration, software, communication, technology. Absolutely. All right, so we're going to pull it all together here. Looking at that multi-generational team leadership piece, we talked about mentorship. So great job, everybody, but it is a two-way street, right? We had that conversation earlier. Cross-mentoring is incredibly valuable. Traditional mentorship is great too, right? But looking at it from a perspective that I can learn just as much from a 15-year-old, to an extent that they can learn from me and vice versa. We can all teach each other and everybody can learn from each other. Looking at that situationally to be flexible and adaptable, right? One size does not fit all. I think of the block scenario here is that you can't put the round block into a square peg, right? Tailor this for the individuals, be flexible and understand their motivations and experiences because it's going to be different for everybody. Holding generations to a higher standard, then again, going back to that motivation piece. Chris, can you talk a little bit about that, the motivation engagement piece with maybe young individuals specifically?
Yeah, and so leaders should actually engage with younger, and that goes back to my quote about, that we as older folks, I'm 52 years old, I'll be 53 here in 2 months, need to have access to younger professionals. By that, I mean they need to be mentoring us as well as we need to be mentoring them, or we're going to miss the fundamental shifts in our society, in our workplace, in our customer base, et cetera, et cetera. That is a huge aspect. So there is so much that can be learned from below. And now I'm 52, and there are folks that are older than me, and I can learn from them. I think one of the things that what an underlying statement that Tom and I really kind of an ethos is that learning can occur anywhere from anyone that is around your circle. And just because you don't have the title of director doesn't mean I cannot not learn from them. I was making one of our pre-shows, we were talking about the janitor, and there's things that I can learn from him as well as our city manager that I can learn from. It's this conduit of information, this input, output information that we can to really be ensuring that we're doing the best on behalf of our residents as well. from that. Now, we had a little side chat that I do want to get to, Tom, that Carrie and Whitney and that type of stuff was going back with your 15-year-old versus 62-year-old. And we talked a little bit about the 62-year-old doesn't need to, quote unquote, doesn't understand technology. And we're like, whoa, so let's slow down. Let's have that discussion here. And it says she did say each person's preference, because we have to understand that even with technology or fill in the blank, some people may be here, some people may be here right at the starting. Some people are just starting with AI. Some people are well above average in AI right now. We have to ask those questions of, are you comfortable with this? Yes or no? I mean, that's how we can then go and really just not take things for granted. We have to understand what lenses they're looking through as well. And Whitney said really good, and we're firm believers in this, is we need to understand what their learning styles are. People are very, very visual learners. Some people are tactical learners. Some people have to read the information, a lot of different things. So really good comments. We have to take those into consideration when we're working with younger staff or older staff, depending on the generation.
Absolutely. Meeting people where they are and bringing them along at their speed to a certain extent. That input piece, and that goes into, how are you meeting your people, right? So looking at some of this is a little graphic about the 4 types of meetings, right? So meetings are different. The way things are consumed now are different. And Chris and I talked about this. For individuals who are going to be potentially entering the workforce, who are really used to and conditioned to a 60-second to 3-minute video of how they consume news and information, can we vary this? Can we meet people in the middle as opposed to maybe the typical every weekly tactical 45 minutes, 1 hour minute meeting, right? How are different ways we can work with individuals and allow them maybe to share their preference? Maybe it's bringing something to the table that another person hasn't, or maybe looking at that one-on-one meeting where you relate with people is an addition to what we're doing as groups with team meetings. So again, going back to that flexibility, not just with how you're working with one individual, but also looking at your own style and how you're getting messages and whatever information that you need to get across to your team.
And Tom, Brian Myers just said something really, really cool that I think is a mentoring moment and a cross-generational gap statement. I just learned something new here. I can sleep well at night. So what I'm taking that is all of a sudden some younger person says something very, astute or something like that I just didn't know. Hey, I learned something new. I can sleep well tonight. Or, hey, listen, I'm learning it from a boomer, or maybe even if we still have some of the traditionalists in there. So I'm respecting both sides with that statement. That's a really cool statement, Brian. Thanks a lot for sharing that.
Yes. And we talked about a moment ago, this ties right in there about understanding your team and so this really ties in. I'm no salesman for the Working Genius, trust me, but I do believe in this. A group of friends and colleagues of ours from across the country have kind of subscribed and taken this and brought it to their teams. And it's one of those assessments, just in general, assessments of learning your team and understanding them can be helpful. There's many different kinds. This one is specific to work habits, and understanding individuals first before you try to have them understand you. And it focuses on this concept of these 6 geniuses and how you are inherently have 2 of those that you really, really enjoy, 2 of them that are kind of in the middle, and 2 of them that maybe drag you down a little bit at work. Knowing this can really impact how your team interacts with each other and understands each other. That inclusive culture and modeling. So we're looking at, again, trying to gain and garner respect, but how do you do that? You're including people, right? Creating spaces where everybody feels heard. And I want to just kind of go into our retention strategies when we're looking not just at, of course, generations. This applies to all, but there may be different check boxes here that apply to a certain generation more than another, right? And one that I want to kind of really take this home on is closer to the bottom, building a connection and relating, finding ways to connect to individuals regardless of where you are at life, right? You're in different spots. You're going to meet people in different ways. And how can we do that? We talked about that mountain rec training that I was a part of. Okay, so we're talking about organizational culture. How do I relate to a 15-year-old and a 60-year-old in the same room? Well, we talked a little bit about Mr. Rogers and the culture there, and that's going to relate maybe or resonate with our boomers or our Gen X. Maybe for our millennials, And I take, I guess I can just take a little bit and admit that I am a big Disney person, right? So Disney and the culture there relates and resonates to me. Um, for those younger individuals entering, right? Can we use TikTok to teach our individuals? And this to the left is City of Palm Beach. They did that lifeguard reverse jump into the pool. I'm not going to show you that video, but it's on their Facebook page and it's awesome. And it's, 17 to 21-year-olds jumping on a trend. They bought into it. It's a great culture video and just a great way to engage the skills and knowledge that those young individuals have. And this is just a funny little 5-second video. The alphas are coming. And I can tell you the alphas language right now is something that is far beyond my understanding, and I'm trying. But, this is maybe something we can do.
Have a good day. Skippity toilet riz.
I don't know what he said, but either way, they're coming, right? And so we need to be prepared. As we wrap up today, looking at our final thoughts, we're looking at how this awareness and adaptability equals the impact of our team, right? These generational differences can really make or break what we're doing. Meeting people where they are, we talked about that, right? And so great quote here from a friend of ours and colleague, Stephen Bentley. I talked to him about him taking on his director role in the city of Raleigh, robust city. And he had shared with me that he had spent 3 hours about every Thursday learning from the staff in this system, getting to know them, going back to Chris. He made that a priority and built that into his schedule, and it is done wonders for them. And again, as I mentioned, be on the lookout for what's coming next. This is a great article or a great post that I found on LinkedIn attached to that Gen Alpha statistic and looking at some of these what we're associating with them with. And I know, Chris, we're kind of running out of time, but we talked about that skills and micro learning, right?
Yeah, that's something that I'm really investigating in is how do I, Tom and I do this we'll call it a long format. There are things that we could potentially, send, 30-second clips, 1-minute clips of education on leadership topics, financial topics, human resources topics, or that still may do a lot of good for our staff because we understand that this Generation Z and alphas, the attention span, is a lot shorter. So how do we adapt? And that's the real key here is how do we adapt to these new generations that are coming because it changes. The good thing I did learn here in the chat box here, and we got to get John back on here, is Google Translate does translate Generation Z slang. So if you need help, go to no, Copilot does. Excuse me.
That's wonderful. Well, everybody, we thank you. I know John's going to take over from here. Don't be Michael Scott. He was not the most adaptable and understanding, but do try to be the best boss you can. Be a leader out there. And we thank you for your time today. And we'll turn back over to John.
Yeah, thanks very much. I know we're at time, so I'll keep it short, but I hope everybody learned at least as much as I did. There's some really great insights today. So a lot of good takeaways. I love the videos. So yeah, thanks for sharing those. And yeah, looking forward to seeing you all again at the next one. Take care, everybody.
Thank you all.